Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi, tractate Bava Batra, page 17b on the top of the page. Starting the Gemara, we started the new parak. Lo yachpol. Pesach habo, Pesach babo, u'misayim b'koisel. Lisni ela im ken yirchik miboiro shel chaveroi shloshet tvachim. That's like the Israeli Litvish pronunciation. Pesach baboir, u'misayim b'koisel. The Gemara says, the Tana of the Mishnah opens by speaking of a pit. A person may not dig a pit close to the pit of another, and yet he ends with a reference to a wall, unless he distances it from the wall of another. Let the Tana teach, unless he distances his pit or ditch 3 handbreadths from the pit of another, just as he begins his statement by referring to a pit. Why does the Mishnah suddenly mention a wall here? Abaye said, and some say it was Rav Yehuda who said, we learn that the Mishnah means from the wall of his pit. In other words, one should read the Mishnah as follows: unless he distances his pit or ditch 3 handbreadths from the wall of another's pit, the neighbor also built his pit close to the border between the two properties. And the Mishnah is teaching that the one digging a pit must distance it 3 handbreadths from the wall of the pit of the other. The Gemara challenges, but even so, let it teach. Unless he distances excavations 3 handbreadths from the pit of another. And one would understand that the term pit is referring to the wall or the other's pit. The Gemara responds by using the phrase from the wall of another. This teaches us, incidentally, that the wall of the pit must be at least 3 handbreadths thick, as the wall of the other's pit occupied the full 3 handbreadths between the cavity of his pit and the property of his neighbor. The practical difference of this observation is with regard to buying and selling, as it is taught in a Braita, with regard to one who says to another, I am selling you a pit and its walls. The wall of the pit must be at least 3 handbreadths thick. It was stated with regard to one who comes to dig any of these excavations or place any of the items listed in the Mishnah close to the boundary of his field, where his neighbor currently has no pit. Abaye says that he may dig or place them close to the boundary, and Rava says he may not dig or place them close to the boundary. The Gemara explains, all agree that he may not dig or place them close to a field of his neighbor, if that field is designated for digging pits, as he will thereby restrict his neighbor from using his field in the manner it is expected to be used. When they disagree, it is with regard to a field that is not designated for digging pits. The Gemara elaborates. Abaye says he may dig these excavations or place these items close to the boundary, as the neighbor's field is not designated for pits, so he's not causing any damage by doing so. Rava says he may not dig these excavations or place these items close to the boundary, as the neighbor can say to him, just as you change your mind and dug a pit, I too might change my mind and dig a pit, and I will no longer be able to dig near my border if you dig your pit close to the boundary. Okay. Ikadamri, there are those who say a different version of this discussion. All agree that one may dig these excavations or place these items close to the boundary of a field that is not designated for digging pits. When they disagree, it is with regard to a field that is designated for digging pits. Abai says, one may dig these excavations or place these items close to the boundary, and this is the halacha, even according to the opinion of the rabbis, who say in the Mishnah 25b, one must distance a tree 25 cubits from a cistern, lest the roots of the tree grow and damage the neighbor's cistern in a field. The difference is that there it is prohibited, as when he plants the tree, there is always a cistern, but here, at the time when he digs a cistern, there is as yet no cistern in his neighbor's field. And Rava says one may not dig these excavations or place these items close to the boundary. And this is the halacha, even according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, who says, in that same Mishnah, this one may dig in his field, and that one may plant in his field. In other words, one need not distance his tree for fear of damaging his neighbor's field through expanding roots. The reason that Rava maintains that his ruling is correct, even according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, is that this matter applies only there, as when he plants the tree, its roots, which might damage the cistern, are not yet present. Consequently, when he plants, he does not cause any damage. But here, the neighbor can say to him, each and every strike of yours with the hoe loosens my earth, and therefore you are already causing damage as you dig your cistern. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. The Gemara suggests a proof. We learned in the Mishnah that a person may not dig a pit close to the pit of another, unless he does so at a distance of 3 handbreadths from his neighbor's wall. The Gemara analyzes the statement. Apparently, the reason he may not dig close to the boundary of his neighbor's field is that there is a pit there, from which it may be inferred that if there is no pit, he may dig his pit close to his neighbor's wall. Granted, according to that second version of the dispute, in which you said all agree that one may dig these excavations or place these items close to the boundary of a field that is not designated for digging pits, one can explain that the Mishnah is referring to a field that is not designated for digging pits. But according to that first version of the dispute, in which you said that they disagree with regard to a field that is not designated for digging pits, there is a difficulty. Granted, this works out well, according to the opinion of Abaye, who says that one may dig one's pit near the boundary when the neighbor has no pit. But according to the opinion of Rava, who maintains that it is prohibited to dig a pit near the boundary under any circumstances, the ruling of the Mishnah is difficult. The Gemara explains, Rava could have said to you, was it not stated with regard to the Mishnah that Abai says, and some say it was Rabbi Yehuda who says, we learned that the Mishnah means from the wall of his pit? This indicates that the neighbor must distance the edge of his pit from the boundary by the thickness of his wall. Which is 3 handbreadths. Sorry, I was thinking about something else. Therefore, even according to the ruling of the Mishnah, one may not dig his pit directly adjacent to the boundary. There are those who say this discussion in the form of a challenge the opinion of Abaya. The Mishnah teaches that one must distance his pit from that of his neighbor, and it was stated with regard to that ruling that Abaya says, and some say it was Rav Yehuda who says, we learn that it means from the wall of his pit. In other words, the edge of the neighbor's pit must be 3 handbreadths away from the boundary. Granted, according to that first version of the dispute, in which you said all agree that he may not dig or place them into close to a field of his neighbor, if that field is designated for digging pits, one can explain that the Mishnah is referring to a field that is designated for digging pits. But according digging pits, I gotta get that gematria. Digging pits. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're spending our whole day talking about, digging pits. 121 in English gematria. Digging pits. That's a good one. I like it. Digging pits. Into the realms of lyrical digging pits. But according to that second version of the dispute, in which you said they disagree with regard to a field that is designated for digging pits. A field that is designated for digging pits. That's a good one. I like that one. It's Yishmak. 362. That's gematria korbani. Kolbani. A field that is designated for digging pits is korbani. The korbani. That's the Sephardic way of learning. There's difficulty. Granted, this works out well according to the opinion of Rava, who says that is prohibited to dig a pit near the boundary in this case. But according to the opinion of Abaye, the ruling of the Mishnah is difficult, that the Mishnah is referring to a wall of a neighbor's pit. This indicates that the first pit was dug close to the boundary of Indian Boundary Park in Chicago. So look at the boundary. This is an Indian boundary. The Gemara explains, Abaye could have said to you, the Mishnah is referring to a specific case where both neighbors came to dig their pits at the same time. Consequently, they must both distance their pits from one another. There is no pit. If there is no pit, as yet, to the boundary, and the neighbor is not digging at that point, one may dig his pit alongside the boundary. The Gemara suggests, coming here, a proof of Ibraise. In the case of a rock that is so soft that it crumbles in one's hands, and no tool is needed, this one may dig his pit from here, and that one may dig his pit from there. This one distances his pit 3 handbreadths and plasters with lime, and that one distances his pit 3 handbreadths and plasters with lime. This indicates that the first one who digs a pit must distance his pit, even when the second one does not yet have a pit. The Gemara rejects this proof. Rock that crumbles in one's hands is different. In this case, one must maintain a distance from the boundary due to the softness of the ground. The Gemara is puzzled by this exchange, and he who asked it, why did he ask it? My karile. The Bryce is explicitly referring to a rock that crumbles in one's hands, so this is clearly a unique case. The Gemara answers that the sage who asked the question assumed that the halacha of the Bryce includes all types of soil, and he thought that it was necessary for the Tana to mention the specific example of the rock that crumbles in one's hands, as it could enter your mind to say that since this substance crumbles in one's hands, he is required to keep his pit at an even greater distance. To counter this, the Braita teaches that a distance of 3 handbreadths is sufficient. Tashima, the Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the Mishnah. one must distance the solid residue of produce that has been pressed free of its oil and animal manure and to be continued on Daf Daf 18, I believe. Yes.